Howdy my totally tubular gamers, we're back with another video.
Today's topic's going to be an interesting one. It's going to be about games that waste your time. A while back I talked about games that don't respect your time. Today we're talking about the ones that, yeah, they just kind of waste it. Time is obviously a very precious commodity, and when you're playing games, you want to get the most out of your video games. You want every single minute to count, and sometimes it feels like games either just take way too long to get the point across, or they're doing things that simply take up way too much of your time. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. Plenty of games have filler, have moments that aren't needed, take forever to do a certain action, have antiquated design that just sucks all your time away. There's a variety of reasons that we're going to get into. Today we'll be talking about 10 games that, in my opinion, at some point waste your time. This doesn't mean that they're bad video games, far from it. Some of the greatest games of all time are actually on this list. It's just there are certain moments, certain areas, certain parts of the game that, yeah, I was playing in it and went, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this quest? Why am I doing this action? Why is it taking forever? What's the point to this? What is it actually adding to my experience? And I look back and I'm like, yeah, that didn't really add much. That was just kind of a waste. It might be a quick 5-minute section. It might be hours and hours of gameplay. That's what we're getting into today. So as always, let me know down below how you're feeling about this topic. Let me know about a game you played where it felt like, yeah, the game was just kind of wasting your time. You were doing something that you didn't think was necessary and it didn't really add or contribute anything to the overall experience. I'd love to know what everybody thinks. Again, not saying these games are bad. They just sometimes do things or have certain sections that, yeah, I don't think really add all that much to the experience. So, don't want to waste too much time on the intro here. Like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Major shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so very, very much. Let's just get into the games. Kicking things off, we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I think this is a great modern day example of a game that just kind of wastes your time. I talked about Valhalla when it came to games that don't respect your time. Yeah, Odyssey just kind of wastes it. And it's not because Odyssey is just this broken mess that isn't worth playing. No, there are plenty of good qualities to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I'll be the first to admit that. It's just this game is a very clear case of a game that has been stretched super thin. It feels like a 15 to 20 hour game stretched out for like 50 hours, and it really just didn't need to be anywhere near this long. It's got all of the modern day trappings of games that do waste your time outside of live service and multiplayer title. The game at times can feel like a live service title or feel endless, and it feels like a lot of the stuff you're doing in this game don't really contribute to the overall package or experience. Everything's just so long and drawn out. This map is absolutely gargantuan. There's no need for it to be this big. It takes forever to get across this map. Even with all the fast travel points, you'll spend a lot of time traveling in this game. And I'll just say for the most part, this really isn't all that enjoyable. Finding the high up spot so then you can see where everything is on the map and unlock the fast travel. Sure, the first few times you do it, it's fine. How about 20, 30, 35 times? Yeah, it gets pretty tiresome. Tiresome is actually a great way to describe a lot of the quests in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. While there are plenty of good ones that I genuinely think are well made, there are so many cookie cutter generic fetch quests that this game is just chock full of, and they make you do so many of them. A ton of them show up in the main quest, but this game actually makes you do side quests. They level gate all of the main quests, and you will have to do side quests in order to get enough XP so then you can do the next main mission. And when it comes to the quality of most of these side quests, it's pretty terrible. Almost all of them are go here, kill someone, collect something, bring it back, investigate an area, and that's it. I just described to you like 95% of the side quests. It gets ultra repetitive, it becomes stale, and above all else, it's just kind of boring. It doesn't add anything to the experience. These quests are the definition of forgettable, and it's like, I don't want to do these. I want to do the quests that actually, add to my overall experience, maybe have something to do with the story or have their own unique little story. But no, it's just a bunch of generic side quests you have to do to get enough XP so then you can do the next main mission. Or of course, you buy the time savers. Yeah, Ubisoft knows that they're wasting their players' time, so they actually let you buy with real world money time savers where you get significantly more XP from all of these quests and killing enemies. So you don't have to play this game as much, you don't have to do anywhere near as many generic fetch quests, and can just move on to the missions you actually want to do that move the story forward or have something interesting going on. If that isn't a clear-cut sign that the game is wasting your time, then I really don't know what else is. But the issues don't end there. While the combat I think is good on its own, Towards the end of the game, shoot, even like the halfway point, enemies just become absolute tanks and you spend way too much time in combat, especially when you're being hunted down by like the mercenaries. They just take an absolute beating and I'm just like, dude, I want to be doing like anything else other than the combat where I repeat the same 5 animations over and over and over. And I wouldn't be saying this if the game was like 15 to 20 hours. It wouldn't really have a chance to become super repetitive and stale. It would just end. But no, it's got to be, as the title implies, an odyssey. An odyssey of boredom. That's exactly what this is. It took me like 50 hours to beat this game, and I felt like the game was just kind of wasting my time for 35 of those hours where I'm just traveling around this giant map doing basic quests that I don't want to do, just hoping I can move on to the next main mission. And so the next question you probably got from me is, why'd you keep playing? You know, I just don't know at this point. Every time I look back on Odyssey, I go, man, what a tedious, monotonous, dull experience. That really felt like a game that wasted my time. And I could say the same thing about Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So this one's probably going to upset a lot of people, but hear me out for a few minutes. I love the Legend of Zelda series. I think that these are some of the greatest games of all time, but I'll be real, really every single 3D Zelda game wastes your time at some point. Some games absolutely do it more than others, but this is just a common theme I've noticed with all the 3D Zelda games. Let me go into more detail. Ocarina of Time, exploring, air quotes, Hyrule Field, moving around Hyrule Field without Epona and the Water Temple, all pretty good examples. Majora's Mask is actually pretty decent when it comes to not wasting your time outside of having to reverse time and go back to the start of the 3-day cycle and having to repeat a few things here and there. Wind Waker, oh yeah, it wastes your time. I love the game, but all of the sailing and hunting down the Triforce pieces, it can feel like a waste of time and a bit unnecessary. Twilight Princess, kind of similar to Ocarina of Time. It's pretty big open area that you get to explore, and the intro feels a bit drawn out for my liking. Skyward Sword, there is a ton of filler in this game. There's backtracking, and a lot of it just feels completely unnecessary, and I've never been big on the backtracking in this game. And then Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, yeah, these are absolutely gargantuan, massive games that have plenty of downtime and moments where it doesn't really feel like you're doing all that much. You're just trying to kind of make your way forward, or you're slowly climbing something. And there are plenty of times where I was like, man, what did I even do in this game? I just played it for like 2 hours and it feels like I did barely anything. That's very common in both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Feels like a little bit more with Tears of the Kingdom, maybe because I already did it in Breath of the Wild, but the feeling was absolutely there for both of them. Again, none of these are bad games, far from it. I think all of these games are fantastic. They just all have sections where I feel like the game just kind of is spinning its wheels. It has filler, it's not making the most of its time, and there were plenty of parts to all of these experiences where I was like, was that really necessary? Was that entire area or gameplay section or time spent just traveling from one area to the next really needed in this game? Did it really add that much? I get it, it's part of a lot of games' experiences, but something about it being in a 3D Zelda game really just sticks out to me. I think it's because the overall quality of these games are exceptionally high. I mean, most of these games are masterpieces, so when moments like these show up, yeah, it just sticks out a bit more. I don't have a ton of beef with these games like I do with AC Odyssey or some mega rant. I'm just going to end it here and say that all of these games are great, but there are moments where I'm like, that was kind of a waste of time. So our next game is Death Stranding. Now I just want to start off and say that I actually really do like Death Stranding. I love the story, I love the characters, where everything goes. It's such a unique premise and setting, and there really is no other game like Death Stranding. But man, does this game really waste your time sometimes. I mean, there's a reason a lot of people said this is a walking simulator or an Amazon delivery man package simulator. A lot of the game really is just walking forward without all that much going on. It's all about carrying your load and going from point A to B. And sure, you do get a bike and eventually a truck, and you can make your way across these landscapes a hell of a lot faster, but it still doesn't negate the fact that a lot of the game really is just slowly moving forward, trying to make it across the terrain. And yeah, that's absolutely the point. And part of me even really likes that. It's chill, and at times it can even be relaxing. But there are plenty of moments when you're playing Death Stranding where you're just like, am I there yet? Am I almost there yet? Have I even gotten halfway? And maybe it's just the really impatient person inside of me, but there was plenty of moments where I was like, I really just want to get from point A to B, especially in the first half of the game before you have all the vehicles and you find yourself going back and forth in the same or at least same looking areas. Yeah, it can feel like the game is kind of wasting your time. I assure you this is one of those games that really actually does pay off the more and more you put into it, and I had a lot of fun with this game. But at times it really can feel like a slog and like you could be doing something better with your time, even in the game. I still think the game is great. I think it has a great length to it and awesome pacing, but one of the reasons the game is so long is because it takes a long ass time usually for your deliveries. And that's just the main quest. I didn't even really bother with the side quests since, yeah, they really did feel like a waste of time and weren't moving the narrative forward in any meaningful way. But I guess this is all part of being a Strand type game. So our next game might not be something you actually expect. I have the entire Mystery Dungeon franchise. Now, if you're not familiar with Mystery Dungeon, it's a series of dungeon crawlers developed by Spike Chunsoft. This is actually a pretty big franchise, and they've even crossed over into other franchises, and the most well-known Mystery Dungeon games are easily the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games. So for the sake of this video, I'll just talk about Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Just know that my complaints really extend across the entire franchise. So yeah, it's a dungeon crawler series where you explore randomly generated floors, defeating enemies and looking for the stairs to go down to the next floor. It sounds pretty simple. It is pretty simple. The thing is, these floors are all randomly generated. With them being randomly generated, it means two things are going to happen. You're either going to quickly find the stairs to the next floor, or you're going to be scraping over the entire floor looking for these damn stairs, combing every single inch. And some of these floors are absolutely massive. And the gameplay doesn't really change much in these games. Like, yeah, you get new party members, you get new moves or attacks, and occasionally there's some extra little gimmicks thrown in there, and there's plenty of different Pokemon that show up or enemy types, but it still is relatively basic dungeon crawler gameplay. And so when you're exploring around some of these floors, it can feel like it takes an eternity to find the stairs, and some of these dungeons have 20, 30 floors to them. And so all of these things really start compounding, especially as you get further and further in the game, and at some point, it's gonna feel like the game is wasting your time. You're just like, come on, where are those fucking stairs? I'm tired of this floor, I'm tired of this dungeon, I just want to move on, and because it's randomly generated, there's a good chance that you've got to comb the entire freaking floor. All of the Mystery Dungeon games are pretty long. Even the original game has a pretty good length to it, and at times it can start to get a bit stale and repetitive, which I know is like the biggest issue with the Mystery Dungeon series. And while I personally do enjoy this series, especially the second Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, at times, yeah, it really does feel like it's wasting my time, it's grinding my gears. I'm like, where's the stairs? I'm tired of this shit, I want to play something else, I want to move on to a different dungeon, do something else, but I gotta find the stairs, and it's randomly generated, so who knows where they're gonna be. Or if you're lucky, they'll just be like right next to you and you can just go to the next floor immediately, and that actually does feel good. I love the Mystery Dungeon series, but sometimes, man, it really does get on my nerves. So our next game might also upset some people, but I have Alan Wake 2. Now, I love Alan Wake 2. It might be my favorite game by Remedy Entertainment, and it was one of my favorite experiences of 2023. But there were plenty of moments when I was playing it where I just went, can we like move on? Can we move forward? Can we move to the next section or story beat? This is taking forever. The pacing in Alan Wake 2 is very, and I mean very slow, especially compared to the original game. The game just really takes its time with literally every single aspect, from the movement speed to getting around the map to the story itself, the storytelling, the conversations, interacting with the world. And especially when you're piecing all of the clues together as Saga, or when you're trying to figure things out as Alan. Like, this is a pretty cool concept where you like go into their heads to really see how they're thinking and putting everything together, but it just feels like it takes forever to get the point across, where you're just kind of spending minutes at a time putting everything together on this board. And it's pretty cool the first few times you do it. It's even cool like halfway through the game, and it's cool during certain sections where it really does actually come together, but a lot of the time it feels like you're just pressing X or A or whatever the button is to move forward over and over, and you're just trying to get past this. Especially if you're actually like really paying attention to the story and what's happening, then you already know where everything is going. Sure, if you take a break from this game or you don't play it for a while, all of this is great at refreshing your memory and recapping everything, but I was just like, I already know what's happening. Why do I have to watch Saga piece everything together? Even she in storyline kind of knows what's happening. Nope, we got to watch everything go onto the board, and it really does just take its time. The story, the characters, and the world building are all really great stuff. It's all really intriguing, but man, at times it feels like the game is just moving at a snail's pace. Like maybe I was just being jittery or impatient, but really wanted to see what would happen next, and sometimes the game, it's going to be a while before you see what happens next. And I didn't realize just how slow this game's pacing actually is until I really compared it with the first game. The first game is significantly faster, especially as far as storytelling is concerned. And I'm not saying that's necessarily better, it's just very different. And when I look back on Alan Wake 2, while there was plenty of things I loved about it, I can also see that it was drawn out a bit longer than it should have. And I think the pacing certainly could have been a bit tighter. And I think if it was, even just a few hours shorter, I wouldn't have felt this feeling that, yeah, it feels like it's just kind of spinning its wheels for the sake of spinning its wheels. So here's another I might get some pushback on, but I have Dragon Quest 2 and 3. Now, I love the Dragon Quest series, I love RPGs, and I understand that these are older games, but I thought with the Dragon Quest 3 remake coming out soon that this was very much worth bringing up. Dragon Quest 2 and 3 are absolutely games that will waste your time. I brought up in games that don't respect your time older RPGs with tons of random encounters. Oh yeah, Dragon Quest 2 and 3 is absolutely that to a T, where you are aimlessly wandering around dungeons or the world map just constantly getting swarmed by random encounters. I'll just be straight up, the entire reason that these two games are on the list is random encounters. The random encounter rate is exceptionally high in both of these games, and it just gets to a certain point where yeah, it absolutely feels like the game is just kind of wasting your time and giving you random encounters for the sake of giving you random encounters, especially in some of these really complex dungeons where you have no idea where you're supposed to go and you're just kind of exploring around, just constantly being bombarded by random encounters, and a dungeon that should have only taken 5 to 10 minutes to complete ends up taking like an hour because there were so many random encounters or traps. And to me, yeah, that's kind of a game that's wasting your time to a certain extent. I get it, back then random encounters were the norm, that was how they extended out games, and game design has very much changed. It's easy to look back and go, oh, that's antiquated and old, and yeah, that's kind of exactly what I'm doing. I like Dragon Quest 2 and 3, I think they're some of the best RPGs from that era of gaming, but I won't deny that at times it felt like the game was just eating up all of my time because I was stuck in random encounters since the encounter rate is so high, or I was stuck in some very confusing dungeons trying to figure out where I'm going to go next. And this isn't even taking grinding into consideration. These are very grindy games where you just need to grind out these encounters in order to actually become powerful enough to beat some of these bosses. As for that Dragon Quest 3 remake, we'll see if they adjust the encounter rate, but I have a good feeling they're not going to. Either way, these are classic RPGs, and the issues I've described really are more common trappings with older role-playing games that just have too many fucking encounters, man. So our next game is a likely suspect for my videos. I feel like I'm talking about this game every other video. We have Metal Gear Solid 5. I love Metal Gear Solid 5. It has some fantastic gameplay, and while the story is pretty much unfinished, I still really do like the game, but there were certain parts where it felt like the game was wasting my time, particularly in the second half. We all know why the second half feels relatively unfinished, but having you replay a bunch of missions from the first half of the game, including a boss fight, really just felt completely unnecessary. If they weren't able to finish creating a bunch of new engaging missions for this game, I kind of would rather have just had the game end. Yeah, it would have been significantly shorter and it would have felt a bit more abrupt than it already does, but I think the pacing would have actually been a bit better. Sure, there are some differences when you replay these missions. It's dark out and there's other parameters that show up, but you really are just kind of replaying these missions. You even replay the boss fight and it plays out almost exactly the same, and it's like, was this really necessary? Did this really add much to the game or the story or the world or anything? Not really, in my opinion. It just added to the game time. Like, yeah, this is a long ass game and it's full of amazing set pieces, moments, missions, etc., but I don't need to replay a bunch of the missions with slightly different parameters. It's just unnecessary. It's easily my biggest issue with this game, along with the story just not really being complete, and I always felt like parts of the second half of the game felt like a waste. I'm sure not everyone's going to agree with this one, but I have Persona 3, and I'm not talking about just one version of Persona 3, I'm talking about every single version of Persona 3 that's ever existed. Now, I love Persona 3, it's got an amazing soundtrack, the story's great, there's tons of lovable characters, and I think the combat is actually pretty great, but damn it, this game absolutely wastes your time in one key area, with Tartarus. I hate Tartarus. I've always hated Tartarus. It's randomly generated dungeon crawling floors, and while it's not that bad at first, really the first half of the game, the second half of the game, you spend just way too much time in Tartarus, especially when you're going to the final boss. There did not need to be 200 plus floors of Tartarus in this game. Like, why? Why did there need to be so many freaking floors in this game? In Persona 3 Reload, it's a little better since you can run, the gameplay is just faster overall, and the battles go by a lot quicker. But in the original game, this shit just takes forever. You spend hours and hours and hours in Tartarus just doing floor after floor. The gameplay barely changes, and I just hated it. I got so sick of it. And I was just like, why are they making you do this? To extend out the game length? There's not really any story content or anything like that that's going on here. The gameplay is just becoming incredibly tedious, monotonous, and it's getting repetitive. In terms of wasting your time, I've never had any other issues with Persona 3. It really is just Tartarus that I got some beef with. And I just wish there wasn't as many floors. I wish there was like half as many floors. I think it would have been a better experience overall. Honestly, just kind of fuck every aspect of Tartarus. Like, the remake definitely addressed some of my issues with it, but at the end of the day, it's still 200 plus floors of randomly generated bullshit. Alright, so this one's a little different. I don't have one game, two games, or a series. I just have difficult NES games. The NES is home to some of the most difficult video games of all time. And while games being super difficult and having you replay them over and over and over might have been the norm back when the NES was still new, nowadays you look back and you're like, yeah, that game really did waste my time. A game that shouldn't take more than an hour ends up taking hours and hours because it is so difficult and you just have to replay sections over and over and over. Obviously, this was kind of done on purpose because they knew the games were super short and that you would be done with it really quickly, so they just made it ultra difficult so that, yeah, you're playing the game much, much longer. But if you look at what you're actually doing a lot of your game time, you're just replaying shit over and over. And if you go back and play NES games with like save states nowadays or rewind functions, you'll find that most NES games are actually pretty short, and the reason some people took an eternity with them was because, yeah, you're just replaying the same thing over and over, and if that isn't a waste of time, well, I don't know what exactly is. A lot of people will say, though, it's not a waste of time because, you know, you're getting better at the game, you're learning the level design, you're learning the mechanics, and that's just part of the charm of playing NES games. Fair enough point, but as somebody who's played plenty of NES games, I can say, yeah, there's plenty of difficult times where I'm like, I know the level design, I know how the mechanics work, I know how the game works. It's just hard as fuck, and it really is just trial and error. And so that really, you know, begs the question, does all of this replaying really benefit the experience? Does it really add to your overall enjoyment of the game? If the answer is yes, then I guess, you know, it's not a waste of time to be playing through the same areas over and over because the game is super difficult. But to me personally, replaying the same areas or levels or sometimes the entire game and all this trial and error, sometimes for really bullshit reasons like Ninja Gaiden where you just have to have the level design memorized, yeah, I think it's a bit of a time waster. Maybe this is a case of mad 'cause bad, but I've always seen replaying the same sections, levels, sometimes the entire game over and over as just kind of a waste. Alright, so to finish things off here, we got a double header, and I hate to put it on here, I love these games, but it's the truth. We have Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Both of these are just massive epic action RPGs that take upwards of an eternity to finish, and while I do really enjoy them and they're some of my favorite games of the modern era, I'll be the first to admit that there are plenty of times and moments where these games, yeah, it can feel like it's wasting your time. Between the two, I'll definitely go with Rebirth when it comes to which one wastes more of your time. Rebirth has just a lot of area sections and open world shenanigans where it kind of does feel like it's wasting your time. It's not really adding much to the overall story, characters, world building, really the experience in general. They have you do mini games or certain gameplay sections, and I'm just like, man, what was the point of that? Like, yeah, I guess it is kind of a throwback to the original game, but it feels like sometimes these were put in here just to be put in here. But Remake isn't innocent in that sense either. Remake has plenty of sections where you just slowly walk forward listening to some really basic exposition, or where you're just kind of running around the city meandering, figuring out where to go next, and the game absolutely takes its time. When it comes to Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth, both of these games really take their time. They are very slow when it comes to pacing and progressions. It kind of feels like they stretched a lot of the original game out, and while I personally like that it is a lot slower and they really flesh things out, I'll be the first to admit that sometimes, yeah, the pacing gets even too slow for me, and I'm just like, okay, come on, can we move to the next area now? And certain sections that took under 30 minutes in the original game now take hours to finish, like in Final Fantasy VII Remake where you're moving the hands just to get through the sewers. It felt like you were here for an eternity, and I was just like, this really isn't adding much. It's just more game for the sake of being more game. Like, don't get it twisted, I like long, big, epic journeys, but when it feels like the game's just kind of spinning its wheels to add more game time, and it doesn't really add much to the experience, yeah, it feels like it's a little bit of a waste of time. And both Final Fantasy VII Remake and Rebirth have that in their main quests. And if you start doing the side quests, oh yeah, it's definitely going to start feeling more like a waste, especially in Rebirth. Rebirth in particular is just a massive game, one of the biggest games of 2024, and I've been doing my best to try to complete it, but man, there are plenty of moments where I'm just like, man, why am I even doing this? I should just go do the main quest and go do something more interesting, because a lot of the open world stuff, while it's not bad, it just kind of feels like a waste. I'm like, I'm not really getting much from this, and I don't feel like it's adding all that much. Sure, the first dozen hours of the open world I actually really did enjoy, but we're talking 60, 70, 80 hours in, and I'm still doing pretty similar stuff when it comes to the open world activities, and I'm like, okay, I think I've had enough. Again, these are both fantastic games and I have no problem recommending them, but at certain moments it does feel like it kind of is wasting your time. And the last thing I want to bring up, an honorable mention, Animal Crossing New Horizons. The game is designed to kind of waste your time, so it totally does. Alright, that's it for this video. Hopefully I didn't waste your time. If you enjoyed it, please let me know down below. Today's code word is going to be tubular. I'm sure you can guess why, but hey, that's just the code word. If you made it to this part of the video, comment that. You'll get a heart from me. Thank you all so very much. Hope you have a wonderful day. See you later. Bye-bye.